I've been meaning to make this video for some time now, and recently Turd-Flinging Monkey stole my thunder a little bit in his response to yet another pointless assault on MGTOW, this time by someone who goes by the YouTube handle ThuleanPerspective. So I figure I better get to it if I'm going to upload my own thoughts on the topic of MGTOW's legacy. I'll link to TFM's response video below in the description box, and you can go check it out at your leisure. To kind of briefly sum things up here, Thulean's video, which TFM responded to, obviously, is your standard attempt to dismiss MGTOW philosophy and shame MGTOW men by calling them beta male losers who won't and shouldn't get to pass their genes on to future generations. Good riddance, according to Thulean, because in a perfect world, his perfect world, only alpha male genes would survive to enhance, to put it one way, the gene pool. Pretty typical stuff men going their own way have been hearing and dealing with for years now. I imagine Thulean, like countless detractor clones parroting the same bullshit before him, believes he's being pretty clever, original, and insightful in his video. But as TFM points out, Thulean's beloved alpha male genes get watered down rather quickly in only a few generations, and the reproductive access he's so proud of is fairly meaningless from a lasting legacy sense, anyway. After all, as things stand presently, your grandchildren only retain 25% of your genes when all is said and done. So what's all the procreation fuss about exactly? On the other hand, it is a really excellent way to satisfy that nagging instinctual urge to get between some woman's legs. There's no arguing against that bit. And if Thulean and other detractors are looking for something to salvage here, they can always hang their hats on that point, I suppose. But of course, there's nothing about MGTOW that prohibits engaging in the act itself. So even that's a fairly empty victory. Most MGTOW guys will tell you to have all the sex you like, just don't have kids and don't get married. And you'll minimize your chances of getting ground up in the system's ruthless gynocentric gears, to which Thulean seems oblivious for the most part. Now, I was careful to say as things stand presently, because it is in fact even worse for Thulean and the Gene Pool Pride Brigade than TFM indicates. And you can think of this video as a reinforcement of and an expansion upon the points TFM raises in his own video. But before I get into why things are even worse for the self-satisfied breeder crowd, let's just steal a quick moment here to remind ourselves what genes and genetic material really are. When you get right down to it, they are nothing more than encoded information. Information you pass on to your offspring. Now, to be sure, it's a highly specialized information that determines or at least influences the physical traits and physiology of your progeny, at least for a couple generations or so anyway, but information nevertheless. So go ahead and store the notion of influential information away for the time being, while we get back to the bad news for the supposed alpha males and their heroic genetic material. I imagine by now many people have heard of CRISPR technology. If not, I'll link to an article about it in the video description below so you can catch up. Now, without getting too technical here, CRISPR allows for gene and genome editing, and that includes human genome editing. Thousands of human genes can be activated or disabled or modified with the technology. To the best of my knowledge, at the time of this recording, while there are experiments on organisms like mosquitoes to try to make them produce offspring incapable of carrying diseases like malaria, when it comes to people, there are serious restrictions in place to prevent modification of the human germline or human embryos using CRISPR. But there's really nothing preventing modification of somatic cells or changes that would be limited to individuals and not passed on to further generations. Anyone, and I mean anyone, can get a hold of a DIY CRISPR kit and start modifying genes, no experience, degree, or certification required. Of course, these kits are limited to strains of yeast and bacteria at the moment, but if such kits are available to your average Joe right now, how long before the transhumanist age we all hear so much about is actually upon us, and people are modifying their own somatic cells. What I'm getting at here is you can bust MGTOW's balls all you like for not reproducing, but if your grandchildren 30 or 40 years from now can edit your precious genetic information right out of their genome using some DIY alteration kit they bought online, then where does that leave your grandpa alpha male genetic lineage, which was only 25% to begin with? Why take pride in something that can so easily be erased with present technology, let alone what we'll see decades from now? And what if human embryonic restrictions are lifted? What if, as a society, we decide it's too risky to let grandpa alpha male pass on some debilitating genetic condition? Will your grandchildren even start off with 25% of their genetic material coming from you? Or will your information have been overwritten to some degree to prevent diseases before they can even mess their first diaper? And now we get to the real point of this video and why I asked you to keep the concept of influential information in mind. Since genes are just that, influential information, MGTOW's genetic, in scare quotes I guess, legacy is the online discussion men going their own way continue to have despite it thoroughly pissing off nearly the entire planet. Think about it. As the saying goes, the internet is forever, right? So as long as humans preserve some version of modern civilization and continue to produce electricity, then all these little MGTOW bits floating around out there in the form of videos and articles and even comments that come along with them will continue to exist. Long after Grandpa Alpha Male is forgotten and his genetic material is thoroughly diluted or overwritten by some CRISPR predecessor or offshoot like TALEN, MGTOW content will still be archived and accessible to future generations. Influential MGTOW information will always be there to help prevent history repeating itself and men getting screwed over by a gynocentric disaster of a system or society. That is the, quote, genetic, unquote, legacy of MGTOW. The discussion, the content, the philosophy, all of that represents and amounts to the offspring of MGTOW. So now you can go ahead and ask yourself the obvious. Why is everyone so hell-bent on preventing the MGTOW discourse? Why do people so often piss and moan that MGTOW guys should just shut the hell up and go their own way? Or why, like Thulean, do they try to shame and humiliate MGTOW into silence while pretending to be oh so happy or amused by it? Let me just play what I recorded a few days ago on my MP3 player, since I liked the way I phrased it at the time and I don't know if I'll be able to repeat it exactly the same way here. Now the MP3 player has a shitty microphone, but I'll try and clean up the audio here so it sounds okay. The MGTOW contribution to future generations, that's what it is. It's the thoughts, it's the intellectual property, so to speak, of MGTOW. That's what it's passing on. And it will always be around to affect future generations. If future generations are interested in this knowledge, it will be there for them, as long as this style of civilization, of human civilization, persists. And I'm beginning to suspect that detractors, MGTOW detractors, sense this, realize this. And this is why they are so opposed to the MGTOW conversation going on. They do not want MGTOW to pass on its knowledge to future generations, to pass on its, quote, DNA, unquote, to future generations. They want MGTOW to shut up and go away and stop being a thorn in their side and just allow them to create a shitty society that fucks with men. That's what they want. That's why you get such a vehement reaction to MGTOW, and that's why you get the shut up and go your own way. And stop bothering me. I don't like what you're saying. I don't want it to go on. I don't want you to go on. I don't want your thoughts to go on. That's what that's all about. And stop and think for a moment. Has there ever before been, in all of human history, a conversation quite like the one MGTOW guys are presently having. And it comes at a time when it can be preserved, when we have the redundant technology to ensure it lasts for future generations to absorb and consider. How much knowledge was lost to the human species after tragedies like the burning of the Library of Alexandria? It would probably take a civilization-wide disaster, however, to delete MGTOW from the human collective consciousness at this point. Or it would take a concerted tyrannical effort of some kind. And that, unfortunately, I don't think is so far-fetched. It's easy to envision an extreme conservative society or an extreme left-wing society wanting to censor and ban the MGTOW discussion. The archiving and preservation of it could even become illegal in order to stamp it out altogether and prevent its continuation. And that crusade could very well be successful, and MGTOW could vanish under such circumstances. But I'd argue we'd then have a society far removed from the one we have now, despite the authoritarian forces in control calling it an improvement, of course, over what we presently have. Obviously and thankfully, we're not there yet, if we ever will be. But the societal elements which view MGTOW as a threat desperately want the philosophy to be a one-generation dead end, because they know who the real alpha male winners, to use Thulean's asinine gynocentric terminology, will turn out to be, especially if they continue to promote a shitty society that hands men nothing but raw deals. And they also know what influential concepts will persist into the future and likely outcompete their own ideas, and almost certainly outlast the genetic information in their beloved sticky bodily effluence, which, when you get right down to it, does nothing but ensure future generations will be around to make up their own minds which notions are most persuasive. Now, I know this idea of passing on information alone rather than living, breathing offspring is probably cold comfort to MGTOW guys who actually want kids and really want the system to change so they can have kids without fear of losing custody. But let people like Thulean go ahead and brag about their breeding achievements for the time being. Let them take the risk of getting chewed up and spit out by a gynocentric system, because eventually, much like their genes, procreative sex will be swapped out for something else, and we humans will probably only have sex strictly for pleasure, not to reproduce. But that is a topic for another video. Alright everybody, thanks for tuning in.